Okay. Great. Okay, so I believe the screen is visible to everyone. So I will take you through a journey which was a part of my PhD as well, where we are planning to produce ammonia from biomass. Ammonia is an important chemical about which we'll discuss in the following part of the class. So the outline goes something like this. Yeah. So we'll have a brief introduction about the need of the process. Then we'll start with modeling at different levels. The first one would be gasifier modeling. So I believe you had an interesting class in the morning with Professor Sanjeev, where he took you through the exciting journey of different types of biomass, feedstocks, and different conversion processes. And one of those conversion processes is the gasification process. The second thing would be the modeling of the biomass to ammonia process. Then I will take you through life cycle assessment briefly. And finally, multi-objective optimization, which is another interesting domain in the modeling regime. So life cycle assessment, I will just briefly go through it. We would have another session about life cycle assessment on Friday, that is day after tomorrow, where more intricacies of this would be discussed. But this session would give you a brief outline what the process is or the modeling is all about. And so yeah, so the modeling would be on different scales. As I told you, it's multi-scale modeling. We'll start with the phase level modeling, where it would be a sort of CFD modeling or computational fluid dynamics. We'll extend this model to process unit level, where we'll model the process unit, which is the gasifier. Then we move on to the plant level, the whole ammonia production facility, which could be like of the size of 100 tons per day. So it's a big plant in itself. And finally, we encapsulate the whole Earth in terms of life cycle assessment. What are the emissions and the costing going to look like? So we start with a very minute level of modeling, like where we are working at phase level. We move up to process unit level. We further move to plant level and finally environment level. So these are the different scales at which you can go ahead in modeling and derive different conclusions. And not to say these are all are interlinked. A change or a value addition at the phase level could have significant impact on the environment level. So this is why this kind of modeling, which is called multi-scale modeling, is gaining a lot of traction nowadays. So with this, I just want to confirm once if the voice is audible to all of you, and so maybe if someone can type in the chat box, I believe.
Yes, Professor. It's
okay, great. So I'll continue. So yeah, let's go further. So introduction. Why do we need ammonia? Now, ammonia is one of the major chemicals that the world needs. All the fertilizers, or most of them, are urea-based. And these urea-based fertilizers use ammonia as a feedstock. And this ammonia is in turn derived from natural gas or naphtha. Now, natural gas is the gas that is the CNG that you use in your cars, and naphtha is one of the products of the oil refining process. Both are fossil fuels, which means you consume them and you emit CO2 into the atmosphere, which will lead to global warming, temperature rise, sea level rise, and problems for the whole world. So in turn, by trying to increase our production of vegetables or our crops, we are emitting a lot of emissions and we need to do something about it. But what are the trade-offs? Can we do without ammonia? No, because our crops need it. So what is the alternate? Produce ammonia from a source which doesn't lead to such adverse effects. So why can biomass be an alternate? This is what we will try to find out in this presentation. So yeah, now biomass is widely available and is carbon neutral in this sense. All the emission that you get from the combustion or the utilization of biomass would be recycled back when the new biomass grows in the same place. So I won't say that biomass won't cause CO2 when it's combusted or it's used. It does, but that CO2 is used up in the process of biomass growth that takes place in the same place. So is that similar to other fossil fuels? Yes. You use the fossil fuels, you have the CO2 into the atmosphere, but that CO2 to get back into the fossil fuels again takes millions of years, whereas in biomass, it will take hardly 10 to 20 years. So the point that I'm trying to make it, biomass has a very low shelf life. The CO2 that you release or the other emission that you release in the atmosphere gets recycled pretty soon, maybe in 10 years, which is maybe half a generation, whereas it will take millions of years or like hundreds of generations for the CO2 that is released from the combustion of fossil fuels. So biomass can be considered carbon neutral, but it has a low energy density. It isn't as energy dense as coal or other feedstocks. Now, if you remember the composition that was shown to you by Professor Sanjeev, a normal biomass would have around 50% of carbon. This percentage is as high as 90% in coal, as well as in the other fuels like natural gas or petroleum. So we have a low energy density, and also biomass is not available all the time. It is restricted by seasons. It's only available twice or thrice a year in the harvesting season. So you need a lot of storage as well as a lot of transportation. Now, a conventional ammonia plant would be of the scale of 1,000 tons per day or 2,000 tons per day, because they want the advantage of economies of scale, which means the bigger the plant, the lower the cost of production and the more the profit you can derive. But we wanted to work on a small scale, and in a country like India, where we have a lot of issues, so we thought like 100 tons of biomass availability would be good enough. And with that, we derived the number of 20,000 tons of year of ammonia production. So this is where we are going to aim at. Now there is another problem, where there is a food versus fuel conflict. If the biomass has any food value, we use it as fuel because we are a large country with a lot of population to feed. We can't use our land to produce fuel. It has to be used to grow food. So if you remember again the presentation by Professor Sanjeev, he would have taken you through the second generation biomass feedstocks, which don't have any food value. All the biomasses are waste. So it might include certain plantation which has energy values, something like eucalyptus that's a common sight that around the roads if you travel, or straw that is burning in the fields nowadays. If someone of you is from North India, he or she might be seeing the repercussions. The air has gone really bad, and that's all because of the burning of the rice and the wheat straw. Another example could be farm waste, which is bagasse. We all see like large sugar mills, and in the vicinity you'll see a high lumps of bagasse, which might be used for electricity production in some cases, but in many cases they're also left without any use. So these are the types of feedstocks that we're going to use, which are called second generation biomass feedstocks, which don't have any food value, which are more or less available as a waste. Okay. Now, some added advantages. Again, if some of you are from the northern part of the country, you might be experiencing something like this. It's very difficult to see clearly in the morning and the evening hours. And the reason, or the major reason, is the burning of the straw. Second, because this study was done in collaboration with some Australian partners, we also had a focus on the Australian problems, which is called dryland salinity. So what happens is, like, the soil there is highly saline, and in the absence of any tree cover, the salt just leaches out and it renders the land useless. So if any one of you has ever got a chance to fly over Australia, it's a very common sight to see the huge pieces of lands like this. They might be white in color or some are pink in color. So this is nothing but the soil leaching out and making the land useless. And this can be solved by the growing of biomass trees such as eucalyptus, which consume a lot of water. So these are some added advantages that also came into the way. Okay, now we chose 3 different locations. One was India, the other was Australia, and third was Brazil. All the 3 countries have ample availability or potential for biomass growth. And we chose 3 different feedstocks. I will start with India. So in India, we have plenty of straw, which is burnt, has no use as such, specifically in northern part of the country. So why don't we utilize it? Another thing is we have different supply chain for all these feedstocks. Now straw is a farm waste, which means it is available in plenty, but it is also spread out. It takes a lot of money or labor or mechanization for collecting this straw because it's spread out through the field of maybe 2 acres, 3 acres, and it is time consuming as well as labor intensive. Second thing is an energy crop. It's not a waste, but it's grown on wasteland. And some trees like eucalyptus, willow are some examples. So I took eucalyptus, which are grown in abundance in Australia. They are also known to solve the problem of dry land salinity. And again, these are highly mechanized farms. You need lots of big machineries, harvesters, and like fertilization for growth of these trees. So it has its own supply chain. The third one is bagasse in Brazil. So Brazil, if some of you are aware, is the largest producer of sugarcane in the whole world. And if the sugarcane is so high, so would be the bagasse. And what do they do with the bagasse? It's available in plenty. So we thought, why not utilize it for ammonia production? Because anyway, they're going to need fertilizers for growing of more sugarcane. So it completes the cycle in that sense. And this type of feedstock is a industry waste, which means it's available in the concentrated form outside the sugar mill. You don't need to have any collection cost. It would have a transportation cost, but not a collection cost. So we have 3 different feedstocks, which was straw in India, bagasse in Brazil, and eucalyptus in Australia. 3 different biomasses, 3 different types of configuration or what I would say composition. They have a different chemical composition, different types of supply chains. And we are going to try to see this if they are good enough for ammonia production using various modeling and simulation tools at different levels. So this is our aim. Okay, now let's start with gasification. Now gasification is a process in which I'm heating biomass in an insufficient supply of air, which means I'm giving only 30% of the required air which would be needed for the complete combustion of biomass. And the result is that I'm getting a syngas, which is rich in hydrogen and carbon monoxide. So this hydrogen, if I combine with nitrogen in the air, I have 2 molecules, H2 and N2, and I can produce ammonia, which is nothing but NH3. Remember it from your school days or your college days. Ammonia is nothing but NH3. So you need 2 ingredients, which is hydrogen and nitrogen. And this hydrogen is coming from biomass gasification. I'm repeating again. Biomass gasification is nothing but heating biomass in an insufficient supply of air, which would produce a gas called syngas. And this syngas would have a lot of hydrogen, which could be used as a feedstock for ammonia. And the nitrogen can anyway come from air, which has a lot of nitrogen. Now coming at the gasification technology. Now gasification is a big branch, which has like its own sub branches. There are different technologies or different types of reactors available. And different types of reactors are known to be economical in different ranges. So as I told you, our aim would be 100 tons of biomass input. So if I go with that range, we found that the fluidized bed configuration would be the best one. So again, for those not having a mechanical or a chemical background, a fluidized bed is a sort of reaction arrangement in which I am flowing a gas through particles of the biomass or small particles of any material at such a high velocity that the bed acts as a fluid. We'll have a video for this to make you have a better understanding or visualization of this process. But suffice it for now, like we chose a process which is called as fluidized bed technology or dual fluidized bed to be specific. And this was based upon the economics at which scale, which gasifier is bound to be the most economic. So our study started with gasification. So this is what the gasifier looks like. We have the biomass coming in. So this is the biomass coming in the magenta arrow, and we are reacting it with steam. So this steam provides the oxygen as well as the heat for the reaction. And the product is the product gas, which is rich in hydrogen and carbon monoxide, which would be used as a feedstock for the production of ammonia. Now, there's also this yellow things that you see around. This is not exactly biomass, but a bed material. By bed material, I mean it's a sort of a compound like silica or dolomite, as it is called. So what happens is, when you have the biomass getting heated, you also get some amount of carbon or some amount of charcoal being produced. This charcoal slides from the bottom of the gasifier into another chamber, which is called the riser, and it gets combusted here in the presence of air. So remember, the process here is not gasification but combustion, which means it would produce CO2 and other gases, which is called flue gas. But in this process, it's heating up the biomass or the bed material as well. The bed material gets heated and is returned back to the reactor, which provides heat for the gasification reaction. So this is a very nice combination of like complementation of two different types of reactors, which is called the dual fluidized bed gasifier. It's very similar to the coking unit in a traditional refinery. So again, anyone who has studied the refinery might be able to relate it to that aspect as well. So this is how the process goes in. You have the biomass, it gets reacted with steam, and the product is a product gas, which is rich in hydrogen and carbon monoxide. We also have some char produced, which slides down, gets combusted in air, heats up the bed material. The char would be converted into CO2, which is the flue gas, and it's exited, and the bed material returns back. So this is how the reaction configuration is. Now, as you might infer, like this is a very dynamic reaction. It isn't a steady state reaction. There's a lot of dynamics involved in it. The velocity profiles, the pressure profiles would be very different. So to model it and have its input into a bigger level model, we needed to change this model into a steady state model or a quasi steady state model, which can give us most of the insights of this very complex system. So how to go about it? Our first thing, or the first thing that ever came to our mind was CFD. So let's take you through it. Okay. So we adopted a multi-scale approach, and the thing that we did was a computational fluid dynamic simulation, which was done in the software called Fluent, ANSYS Fluent. Many of you would have heard about it. So what it does is, it's a conventional CFD software, which is based on the finite volume methodology. And you can define the model, you can define the velocity profiles, define the physics, and it will give you the different profiles for a reaction system. And this is what we did for the fluidized bed. Now, our aim was to convert this dynamic system into a steady state system. So how we did that? We adopted a methodology called residence time distribution. How that acts? We place a react tracer into the system and note down its concentration at the outlet. So the first thing was, I simulated the whole process in the CFD. Then once the simulation had achieved a quasi steady state, I put in a tracer and note down its concentration at the output. Compare that output with the conventional curve outputs for different types of tracers and come up with a reactor system of this simple kind of reactors, which could be used to replicate this whole system. And what we were trying to replicate was a real case plant, which was working in Austria. So this is one of the best gasifiers in the world, which has been working for around 20 years now. It's an 8 megawatt CHP plant in Güssing. If anyone is interested in biomass energy, this would be a case study worth learning about. It's one of the success stories as far as the biomass energy is concerned. So I'll give you a brief about it, like how the CFD simulation looks like. So this is what the CFD of the gasifier look like. So this is a fluidized bed. So this is what the bed acts like. You have the air coming or the steam coming at such a high velocity that the bed acts like a fluid, as if it was a fluid. And you would see like the bubbles are rising at almost at equal pace on both the sides, but slowly the configuration would change and it would become totally random. So this is random profile is something that we aimed at. Once this random profile was achieved, we did a tracer switch. I introduced a tracer at the bottom of this model and noted down its concentration at the output. Yeah. The tracer looks something like this. We introduce a tracer and it's moving along the velocity profiles. And these simulations were done in ANSYS Fluent, where I'm working at the phase level. So I note down the configuration at the outlet, and this gives me an idea what the reaction system would look like if I were to model this as a combination of ideal reactors. Again, the tracer approach. Now there are many different tracer approach. How would I want the tracer to go through? So we went through 4 different technologies. One is called the frozen velocity approach, which means I run the simulation, I froze all the velocity profiles, and then introduce a tracer, which means when the tracer is running through the flow regime, it is only going through the frozen velocity profiles that have frozen. The second was the snapshot approach, which was proposed by Professor Ranade, who is like one of the like well-known person in the field of CFD. So what he proposed was, apart from just frozen the velocity, we can change these velocity profiles at an interval of maybe 0.5 second, 2 seconds, or 5 seconds. We did that, but again, the profile was almost similar. Like this is the output concentration. Then the third one was, what if I average out all the velocity profiles? Then also I got almost this similar graph. The final thing was the most complex simulation, which is all the equations are solved simultaneously, which means the velocity equation, the pressure equations, the bed equation, as well as the tracer equation. So when I did that, I got a transient approach, and this is was the type of output that I get for the tracer, which was nothing but a single rise in the value. And also I noted down the tracer concentration at different ends, which was above the dense bed, middle of the bed, and the outlet of the bed. So this helped me come up with the different reaction configuration and also the velocity profiles. So this is here I show you the velocity profile, and you can see as the velocity comes out from the bed to the open chamber of the gasifier, you can see 2 different wakes being formed here. So one amount, the major amount of gas is going through here, but there's small amount of gas going through this portion as well as this portion. So this means different reaction systems have to act in parallel. So based upon all this analysis, we came up with a reaction system which looks something like this. So this particular system acted as a dense zone. We have a reaction system, and then we also have a recycle in here. By recycle, I mean the bed would be going back down as well. And then coming to the middle bed, as I showed in the simulation, you had velocities going in 2 different directions or 2 different wakes being formed. So we have 2 reaction profiles in parallel. And finally, in the freeboard or the top of the bed, there isn't much change. So we put a dynamic system into a steady state system. And we could come up with the profiles or the reaction system that could be used to model it. And we validated the results using MATLAB. So this was the simulation at the phase level, where we did a CFD simulation and tried to make a steady state system from a dynamic system of the gasifier. So this was one type of modeling. Now, going further, the second type of model. So this is what the gasifier model looked like. And all this was done in this software called Aspen Plus, about which we are going to do a hands-on session in probably the next session. So we have the different types of reactors that are occurring in here. Again, if anyone of you is from civil, chemical, or mechanical background, they would know about there are 2 types of ideal reactors, which are called plug flow reactors and CSTRs, which are complete mixed flow reactors. So these are these CMRs, complete CSTRs or CMRs, and these are the plug flow reactors. So we could devise the whole reaction regime in a steady state software, which is Aspen Plus, which is based upon a dynamic system, which was modeled in ANSYS Fluent. And this had all the parts of this dual fluidized bed gasifier. The biomass is getting in. It gets spiralized, which means all the biomass specifics are broken down. We have the reaction that's occurring with steam and the bed material, and this is the freeboard where all the reactions occur. And then we also have the char reaction, which is the char produced, it's combusted with air, and the bed material gets back. So all the physical phenomena ranging from biomass getting gasified to the bed material rotating was modeled in this particular reaction model. You could easily get the temperature profiles, the flow rates of the bed material as well as the biomass, as well as the composition and the flow rate of the different gases. So that was the biomass model that we looked at. And we did that for 3 different biomass feedstocks. Now, remembering back, we had 3 different biomass feedstocks in 3 different places, which was India, Australia, and Brazil. And the feedstocks were eucalyptus or wood, straw in India, and bagasse in Brazil. The composition remains same, like 2.3 tons per hour or around 100 tons per day. And this was the composition of the syngas that we got. Maximum amount of hydrogen, almost 40% of hydrogen. But since the composition of biomass is different, we would get different amount of gases. Then carbon monoxide, around 20% CO2, and around 8 to 6% of methane. We also had certain higher hydrocarbons, which are coal tars, which needs to be removed. We could also calculate the temperature profile, what was the temperature of the gasifier and the combustion section, the circulation rate of the bed material. So all this was given to us by this model and was validated. And this was in line with what we would experience in reality as well. So this is where the model helped us. We could derive the biomass gasification at different scales for different feedstocks and get out what the product is going to look like from the gasification process. So this is where modeling came to a rescue. Next, now we need to extend this model to plant scale. Before that, we also did the sensitivity analysis. So I want to bring out another important aspect. It's not important to match the individual values in the model. It's very important to match the sensitivity analysis as well. Is the trend the same if I change a parameter? Is the trend that is in line with the physical phenomena? And we did that as well. We chose to change the gasifier temperature and validated the results as well. If I increase the temperature, I would expect the gas rate to increase, which was done. And I would also expect the hydrogen production to go high and the CO production to go almost remain constant. And this is what was also observed in the model. So the model was robust enough. Now the second thing is, now I will need to expand this whole thing to ammonia production. Now ammonia production is a very complex process again, which takes place in big plants. And if anyone has had the liberty to visit it in his life, like he or she might know the complexity that is involved. And the normal size would be 1,000 tons per day. 1,000 tons per day is a very big amount. And now we needed to simulate the whole plant where the feedstock was coming from biomass. So let me go and take you through the second level of modeling, which was the plant level model. So the first scale of modeling was the CFD modeling, which was phase level. Then the process unit modeling, which was the gasifier. And now we are going to the third level, which is the whole plant. The input is the biomass, which we are going through. Then we need to dry the biomass because it has certain moisture content. This dried biomass would then be gasified. And as you remember, the gasifier had 2 chambers, the biomass gasifier and the char combustor. So the gasifier would give us the syngas, which is rich in hydrogen, and we need to take it through a reformer. So by reformer, I mean I'm converting the methane, which is CH4, into the hydrogen content. So this is where the reformer comes into play, because the CH4, which was around 8 to 6% in the syngas, needs to be converted into hydrogen as well. Then we need to do a gas cooling and cleaning. We need to compress the gas to around 20 to 30 bars, because these all processes take place at high pressure. Then comes the isothermal shift reaction. The shift reaction is conversion of carbon monoxide, which is CO, to CO2. So we are reacting carbon monoxide with water, that is, a steam is coming in, to produce more hydrogen and CO2. We remove the excess water. Then we have a unit called as pressure swing adsorption to remove all the CO2 that is present. A methanation unit to convert any left oxides, because they act as poison for the ammonia catalyst. And finally, we have the conventional Haber-Bosch loop, which is the reaction of hydrogen reacting with nitrogen and giving us ammonia, NH3. So this is what the process looks like. And because it was a small scale, we needed it to model such that the economics work nicely at a small scale. So we've searched for different ammonia flow sheets And we got to know about one particular process which was developed by ICI. So ICI is a UK-based chemical giant, and which has been producing ammonia for maybe 50 years now. So they had proposed a flow sheet which was basically good for small-scale systems such as us, production of around 100 tons per day. And this involved a low-pressure ammonia loop, which was running at around 80 bars as compared to 200 bars, isothermal shift, which means the shift is taking place in one reactor. Normally, you would have 2 to 3 reactors in series. We included the TARS, which is not taken into studies as such, and use of a pressure swing adsorption. So now we have gone from a process unit level to the plant level simulation. And all this again was done in the Askin Plus simulation, about which we are going to have the hands-on session soon. So this is just to give you a preview what kind of simulations can be done in that software. And again, so this is the plant that we adopted. And this just to show you where normal plants had a minima of the cost. So this is the cost of ammonia production per ton. So every plant would have an economics like this. They would have a minimum where the cost goes the minimum. So where the other plants had a minimum of around 1,200, 1,300 tons per day, this plant had a minimum of around 450 tons per day. And this is what we adopted for our study. And then we had 3 different configurations as well, which are summarized as ATR, SMR, and CR. So this is based on how the reforming takes place. The first one is autothermal reforming, which means I provide in air. So air has 2 parts, oxygen and nitrogen. The oxygen is used to react with methane to produce more hydrogen, and the nitrogen acts as a source of nitrogen, which would be inlet in the ammonia process. So we have the hydrogen coming from the biomass gasification and nitrogen coming from air, and oxygen is used to provide heat for this reaction. So this is one particular configuration. The other is I provide steam instead of air, which means I'm providing an oxygen for the conversion of methane. But for nitrogen, I provide it using an air separation unit just before the ammonia loop. So this helps me in a smaller reaction sizes, all the sizes decreases because the nitrogen is not going through all of these. If the nitrogen was to go through, it has its own volume, the reaction size increases, so does the cost. So it was a trade-off between the efficiency as well as cost. The third configuration was a novel configuration which involved CO2 reforming or dry reforming, which means, now if you remember, I had a combustion chamber in the combustion section of the gasifier, which had a flue gas. Now this flue gas was nothing but CO2 and nitrogen. Can I use that as an oxidizing agent? Yes, and the process is called dry reforming. So I add that into the reformer. The CO2 acts as a source of oxygen, and the nitrogen acts as a source of nitrogen. So nitrogen is used here, the hydrogen is coming from the gasifier, and I have all the ingredients for ammonia production. Now to repeat, I would have 9 different configurations, 3 biomasses and 3 flow sheet configurations. The biomasses are bagasse in Brazil, straw in India, and eucalyptus in Australia. And the configurations are ATR, SMR, and CR. So 3 into 3, 9 different configurations. So this is what I have. Heat integration. Now, a flow sheet like this would have a lot of heat sources and heat sinks. Now, we would need heat for production of steam, biomass drying, but how are you going to get that steam? So that steam could be generated in the heat sources, which are basically the shift reaction that produces extra heat, or the ammonia production loop, which again has extra heat. So we had a heat integration, and the methodology that we undertook was called pinch analysis. Again, it would be something people from mechanical and chemical engineering would understand better than others. But again, it's an interesting concept. I'm matching all the heat sources and heat sinks, which means all the heat available in the plant, anywhere in the plant, is linked to all the heat needs in the plant. And this is done through the production of a grand composite curve. And it changes a different configuration. So we automated the whole process such that any change in the flow sheet configuration, the heat sources and the heat sinks are automatically matched. In any case, the steam production would be maximum. So I'm always working at the most efficient configuration as far as heat integration is concerned. So this was another aspect that we brought into modeling. So if you're going into the modeling of biorefineries, this is going to be a very important aspect, which is heat integration, because heat is something that is very costly. Most of the emissions that are associated with industry are basically coming from the heating process, which is coming from burning of fossil fuels, which would provide heat to the reactions. A basic example would be the iron and steel industry, which consume a lot of heat. And this heat is nothing but by burning of coal. So this is very important. If you're going into the industrial processes, this kind of modeling becomes very important. Now, coming to economics. Again, you would have a separate class in economics, how to go about the economics of the whole plant. So I won't go and dwell into the depths of the economics, but just tell you like, now the output from the plant level can then be used to predict the economics, which means I have my contribution of the capex, which is the annual investment, and all the other costs. So again, I have 9 different configurations, 3 different feedstocks, and 3 different flow sheet configurations, like wood, straw, bagasse, and ATR, SMR, and CR. And you can see the costing of all the 3 is very different. Start with biomass feedstocks. It's very costly in Australia, very cheap in Brazil, somewhere middle in India, because the collection costs of straw are very high, whereas bagasse is readily available outside the farm. Electricity, very costly again in Australia, somewhat costly in Brazil, cheaper in India. So electricity is still cheaper in India, and that contributes. Labor cost. The labor is very high in Australia, cheap in India and Brazil. Again, operating maintenance cost, somewhat high in Australia and Brazil, cheaper in India. Coming to capex, it's high in Australia, still high in Brazil, because Brazil isn't an industrial hub. It imports a lot of its technology, and very cheap in India, because it's very cheap to make things in India. So with this, I want to bring out this fact that different flow sheet configurations would have different cost implications. You can't say that if I have the same process, which is production of ammonia from biomass, it's going to act same in all the 3 different locations. No, it's going to be very different for the location as well as configuration. And this is what we are trying to prove through this flow sheet simulation. We simulated the whole plant, that is starting from biomass till ammonia production. And this is how much variation we can see in the production cost of ammonia. It can go as high as $1,400 per ton of ammonia, and as low around 700 tons. The market price of ammonia somewhere ranges between $550 to $600. So in India, we are quite near the market price, but we are almost double as we are if we go in Australia. And also going through the breakdown of the capital cost, which is the initial investment that you would need. So investment also, like we would have a different breakup. In India, it's very cheap, and the most expensive is Brazil, and somewhat similar is Australia. And the important thing to note here is this: there's one particular plant configuration, which is SMR, which is higher of the 3. And the reason is it has an ASU, which will produce nitrogen. On the other 2 configurations, the nitrogen is coming a part of the gas, either air or flue gas. But in this, we need a separate air separation unit to supply nitrogen. So that's why the capex goes in, but the OPEX is somewhat lower. And that's why if you look at the final price, it's almost in the same range. So it cancels each other. And we try to compare this study with the previous studies for ammonia production biomass, and we could produce ammonia from biomass at a small scale, which was cost competitive to larger scales. Normally, what would you expect the relation to go something like this? If this is the production cost at maybe 1,200 tons per day, it would increase twice or thrice if I'm lowering the scale. But we could achieve the same thing without harming from the economies of scale. And this is where the modeling and simulation helped us. A larger aspect. Now we started with the phase level modeling. Then we moved to a process unit level modeling. We moved to a plant level modeling, which gave us the economics. And finally, the life cycle assessment, which will give us the emissions, different emissions from different parts of the plant, and the implication of this plant on the country, on the first the city, then the state, then the country, and the world as a whole. So again, you would again study these things in detail in the last session that we have on Friday. We will go through the nitty-gritties of life cycle assessment. But just to give you a preview, this is what the flow sheet looks like. It has many inputs. Like you will cultivate biomass, then you would have transportation, which would be back and forth. You have trucks, which would take biomass from the field or from the plant to the process plant and back. So they would be normally going back and loaded and then unload them and come back empty. So we have a transportation going two ways. And then we had the gasifier, which would have its own consumption of different chemicals like bed material or charcoal, or which is calcium carbonate. Also, it would consume water. We would have different catalysts which would go into different reactions. We would have the different chemicals that would go into the filters. Electricity would go into the compressors. And then we would also have the utilities, which means the extra heat that we would use that to produce electricity. So we would have in-house electricity production as well. So what would be the implication of all these inputs and outputs on the complete process? This is what we would try to quantify. So LCA, as in terms, like a plant could have many types of emission, not just CO2. It could be CO2, it could be particulate matter, it could be CFCs, which could lead to ozone depletion. It could be acidification potential coming from production of nitrogen oxides. It could be eutrophication coming from the production of phosphorus and ammonia-based things. It could be the land use. So it could have many different implications, and which could be noted down into different midpoints and the endpoint indicators. So the midpoints are 18 in number, which are shown in the middle part of this slide. And the most common one is the climate change, which I believe every one of us knows about. But that's not the only one. There are many others. And all these can be clubbed into three major ones, which is human health, how they would impact the human health. And it's given in the unit called DALY, which means disability adjusted life years, which means how much do you expect your lifespan to get reduced if this technology was to come into the picture. The second thing is again ecosystems, which is the reduction in life in different species, which involves the tree species as well as animal species. And finally, the resources depletion. How much resources are we depleting in terms of dollars? And all this can be turned into or normalized into a single indicator. So the difference is that the midpoints make much more sense, or the relationship is much more concrete, but it doesn't make a sense to us. Like if someone says this technology would lead to a 2-degree rise in the temperature, might not make a difference to us. But if I say this technology would decrease your lifespan by 5 years, it makes effect to you. It's your life and it's decreased by 5 years. It's up to us how we want to give the results. It could be either midpoints or the endpoints. We'll discuss that again, but just suffice it to say the midpoints, the relationship is much more concrete, but it's much difficult to understand for normal persons. Whereas for the endpoints, which is human health, ecosystems, and resources, it could be a very complex relationship, which would depend upon very national factors, international factors, the lifespan, and a lot of social things get into it. But it makes much more sense to us. So for this study, we did both of them, the midpoints and the endpoints. What I'm doing in here is I have the whole plant simulation. I quantify the different emissions. And from these emissions, I try to bring out what the effect on the environment was going to be as a whole in terms of the different midpoints as well as the single endpoint indicator. So yeah, this LCA can give us results which are something similar to this. Herein I'm showing you the wood used for production of ammonia for 3 different process configurations, which is SMR, ATR, and CR. And this is the global warming potential. And you can see this is the electricity production that is causing the most emissions. Then comes the fuel production, which is natural gas, which is absent in the second case because I don't use any natural gas in that. And then we have transportation, the cultivation, and the other chemicals that are causing the pollution. And this could be very different for different things. Like in straw in India, this production is more than 1, whereas it was less than 0.8 in Australia. The reason being, in India, we use a lot of pesticides and fertilizers, and all that contributes to the straw as well. And because a lot of fertilizers and pesticides are gone into it, which are again fossil-based, we have a lot of emissions associated. Also, we have the electricity production, which is based on coal-based electricity. The efficiency is very low, and the coal that we're using is very dirty. So electricity that we're getting is not very clean. Any electricity that I import from the grid would be having its own implications. And that's another reason why in India, the discussion of electric vehicles is very hot. People are saying if you're still going to produce electricity from the coal-based power plants, there's no point switching to electric vehicles because you are just changing your source of emission. Earlier, the emissions were right in the city. Now you have shifted them to a power plant where the electricity is still being produced is dirty. So this is where LCA comes into a picture, and which we'll discuss later again. So again, in straw, you can see we have in India, this the electricity again, which is very dirty. Then comes to Brazil. This same electricity has gone to less than 0.2 because the electricity produced there is based on hydel power as well as biomass. So it's a biogenic source, and the electricity produced is very clean. So three different processes or three different biomasses would have very different emission profiles. Coming to another type of result, which is ozone depletion potential. Here you can see different factors contribute to different profiles in this. Like now I have three different biomass, which is wood, straw, and bagasse, which is Australia, India, and Brazil. And this ozone depletion potential is basically the release of CFCs into there through different process configurations. And in Australia, you'll see it's the road transport that will cause the most effect. In India, it's the cultivation of straw, and in Brazil, it's the electricity production. So in different countries, different process configuration, different factors would lead to different types of emissions, and they can vary very differently. So this is another thing that you need to know that we get from the simulation at different levels. And again, like I can club everything into a single step indicator, and here I have shown in all the 9 results. And all the 9 results, if I compare that with the state-of-the-art technologies, I'm still to gain. This is a single step indicator from a conventional fossil fuel-based ammonia production, and these are my 9 processes. So irrespective of which process I aim, I would say in India for straw, I might be very near to the state-of-the-art emissions, but still I can save significantly. And the most savings can be done in the case of bagasse in Brazil. So now comes the final stage of the modeling, which is multi-objective optimization. Now I have a process simulation. I know all the inputs and the outputs. I know what the economic implications are. I know what the emission implications are, but which is the best case to run at? So that's why we bring in multi-objective optimization, which means optimizing 2 factors or 2 objectives at the same time. And our objective would be emissions as well as the cost, the most intuitive ones. I want to minimize the cost and I want to minimize the emissions. So I have the different simulations which are run in Aspen Plus. I do a heat integration of everyone. So every simulation is optimum. I do a life cycle assessment and a life cycle costing, as I've shown you. Then I run it through an optimization algorithm, which is very similar to the theory of natural selection proposed by Darwin, which means the best solution go further and the not so good ones are rejected by nature. So the normal things that we have is a selection. We select the best species. We have a crossover, which means we intermingle the best species. Then we have the mutation. Even among the best species or the crossover, we do some kind of mutation to bring out even the best out of the better ones. And these kind of loop keeps on running till we meet the required number of generation. And the result is something like this. We get a Pareto front. Now by Pareto front, I mean all the solutions on this graph are best. If one solution here is better in terms of CO2 emissions, the other solution would be here. So in comparison, not both the solution would be better in terms of cost and emission. If one solution is better in terms of cost, it would be not so good in terms of emissions. If it's better in terms of cost, it would be not so good in terms of emissions. So it's up to us now where we need to work. This type of graph would give us plenty of solutions which are the best ones, and it's up to us which solution to choose. Okay, so just to give you like an example how this proceeds, like say I run the first simulation and this is the blue, this is the other kind of solution I would get. I run it for 10 generation and the front looks like something like this, the red ones. I run it for 10 more generation, this is how the solution looks like in green. I run it for 30 generation, this is how the front looks like. The more the generation I run, the better the results become, and all the solutions are called non-dominated or Pareto front, which means all the solutions are best. If one solution has a good economics, it would have an emissions of 1.2. If I choose a solution here, it would not be so good in economics, but have a good range in terms of emissions. So there's a trade-off, and it's up to us where we want to work at. So we did this simulation for all the 9 cases, and the changes are like, these are the variables we changed. We changed the bed material flow rate, the steam to biomass ratio, the air supply, the temperature ranges, and like these are the factors. I won't go much into detail. And this is where modeling at a phase level or the process unit level comes into being. And I'm going to show you how the modeling at a smaller phase level or a process unit level would affect the bigger economic and the emission picture. And this is how the effects look like. So these are the results for the 9 different cases. So these are the results for India. This is the Pareto front for India. This is for Australia, and this is for Brazil. Again, the same graph here. I'm showing the color effect is the ammonia production, which shows the color, and the electricity imports from grid. So the take-home point again here remains the same. All the process simulation at a smaller scale would have a drastic effect at a larger scale. As you can see, this is the variation in the emissions, and this is the variation on the y-axis in terms of cost in India. Now coming to like derive some insights from these types of simulation in India. We could produce ammonia quite cheaply. It can go as low as maybe $600 per ton, which is quite quite similar to the ammonia production cost from coal or other fossil fuels. But the emissions are also close. A state-of-the-art plant would give you somewhere emission between 1.8. So we are getting close to that. So we are making it at a low cost, and the reasons we have discussed before, but we are also losing in terms of emissions. And most of these emissions are coming from the electricity that we're importing from the grid, and that's dirty and based upon coal. As you can see, the higher the emissions lead to a bigger import of electricity from the grid. So the results which would import the maximum amount of electricity from the grid, and this is the reason why they are having the most emissions. Coming to Brazil, the electricity is quite green in itself, but it has huge labor and labor costs. So that's why the economics has increased, but emissions have decreased. So I can't produce it as cheaply as in India, but I can save a lot in terms of emissions. But again, in terms of Brazil, the electricity is coming from greener sources, so it won't have that much emission. Coming to Australia, it has the advantages of none of it. It has a costly electricity and a coal-based electricity. So it's the least preferred case. I would never go for production of electricity or ammonia from biomass in Australia because I'm not saving in terms of cost or in terms of emissions. So these are some types of insights that you can derive from these kinds of simulations. And also another thing that you can go for is you can produce a global Pareto, which means if I know these are the types of cost and these are the types of emissions I want to work at, this Pareto would give me, this is the place you should go for. And this is the process configuration you should go for. So if I want to work here, probably SMR India would be good. If I want to work here, maybe ATR India would be good. If I want a point in here, maybe Brazil would be the best option. So this is where like how far the simulation and modeling can take us. We can start at a phase level and go till decision making in terms of how can I design a plant which would have give me so and so cost and so emissions. So again, just a comparison of all these flow sheets along with the sensitivity with all the different LCAs of the different plants available. And it shows us that no point which methodology or which place we adopt, we are still to save. In India, it's the highest. And even after taking all the sensitivity into account, we would be lesser than the conventional, the state-of-the-art ammonia production. So no matter which plant we aim for, we are still going to save in terms of the global warming potential. So with this, let me bring forward a few conclusions that I've taken you through different simulation platforms, which were rooted in bioenergy-based simulations. And we use simulation platforms like CFD, MATLAB, Aspen Plus, and genetic algorithms. And we did a life cycle assessment and life cycle modeling. The best thing was that different biomass feedstocks, process configuration, geographical regions would have their own niche economic and environmental advantages. And we also bring forward the advantages of process modeling and simulation at different levels. So this is how we close the whole cycle. We have taken like the feedstock that would the biomass. We can have the biomass logistics, the gasification, ammonia production, and this ammonia can be used for urea fertilization, and the cycle gets completed, as well as we have ammonia for other uses. So with this, I would take a break here, and let me know if you have any questions at this point of time. Maybe I'll give the right to all of you to unmute yourself. So yeah, if you have any questions on this, we can have a discussion.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Dr. Jnanamurthy, Anna University, Villupuram campus, Tamil Nadu.
Your voice is not very clear. So can you speak a bit slowly, or maybe you can chat, type in the chat box?
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you, but your voice is not very clear.
Okay. Now, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, sir. I am Dr. Jnanamurthy, Anna University, Villupuram campus, Tamil Nadu. This model we are using the, for example, any other applications like sewage plant like that. It is possible, sir. We are production of sewage to biogas is possible. Same simulate.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I understand your question correctly, you want to ask if I can use this like platform for other conversion processes like like biogas production.
Yes,
yeah, definitely it can be used, definitely. So all the chemical, all the biomass conversion processes would basically be like different types of chemical reactions and different reactors, and this is what this platform can be used very effectively, and this is what we are going to have a look in the hands-on session as well. And maybe I'll take you through the algae process as well, if time allows.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, great. So what I'll take you through is now like, sorry, hello, anyone? Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Actually, I have a doubt. I didn't capture it properly. Like biomass amount in between there, I could see a methanation process. What is that actually? Like actually, we are converting this into ammonia, right?
Yes.
So what does this methanation process in between in that slide number 18? That is one question. And one more thing is like regarding in gasification, if we are going for gasification, if we parallelly make biochar as well as biofuel, so what will be the maximum yields that we can achieve from woody biomass? And say if we take 1 kilo of woody biomass, how much proportion we can get biochar out of that 1 kg? In the literature, I could see that some 10%, 20. And I'm not sure about the biofuel. Approximately what quantity of biofuel can be extracted if we go for that? Yeah.
Okay. So let me try to answer the first question. So what is the use of a methanator in this? So I've shown you the flow sheet, and maybe I can go to the previous flow sheet. This would make much more sense. So, okay, so by the time we come at this step, all the gases that we have is mainly hydrogen and nitrogen in the ratio 3:1. But it also has certain oxides like CO and CO2. Now these oxides act as a poison for the ammonia synthesis catalyst, which is alumina-based catalyst. So we need to remove that. So this reaction is basically converting these oxides back into methane so that they don't act as a poison here. So this is a normal reactor that you would find in any ammonia reaction process. This is like a very important aspect, because we can't allow any oxides. It might be water, carbon dioxide, or CO, because all these processes might not be 100% efficient. It would remove 99.9% of CO, but still 0.1% CO2 would be left in this process. And that CO2 we are converting here back into methane. So this is the answer to the first question. And your second question was basically for the production of bio-oil or biochar. So again, like if you are going for biochar production, there are two main methodologies. It's called torrefaction or it's called pyrolysis. It's almost a similar process, just a difference in the temperature ranges. Biomass pyrolysis around 500 degrees Celsius, torrefaction would end around 300 degrees Celsius. So for pyrolysis, the maximum amount of biochar would depend upon two factors, which is your temperature and your heating rate, which means how fast you are heating the biomass. Are you taking 1 second to reach the temperature of 500 degrees Celsius, or are you taking a time of 1 hour? So slow heating would yield to maximum amount of char, and that could go as high as 50% in case of pyrolysis. It could be much higher in torrefaction where the temperature is lower around 300 degrees Celsius. So this is with respect to biochar. You can produce biochar, and the applications of biochar would be either you can go for the production of activated carbon, which would have its own applications in different industries. The best one would be used in the water purification. The second is you can use it as a soil enhancer in the field. And also biochar might be used as a scrubber in some other industrial processes. Now coming to bio-oil. Now bio-oil is something that you would get from biomass pyrolysis, if you are only concerned about bio-oil. If you are concerned about bioethanol, you would have the process called fermentation for it. And if you are talking about biodiesel, then you would go for trans-esterification, which are all different processes. So I am just talking here about biomass pyrolysis, and that could give you a maximum of 40% of bio-oil. And that would again be a function of your temperature and the residence time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So maybe I'll take you people through another kind of simulation, like a slightly different, like a kind of simulation in the same software to just make you aware of the width of the software. So where we are now dealing with algal biofuels. So I would request everyone to please mute their mic unless they're asking something. Yeah, thanks a lot. Okay, so for the next 15 minutes or so, I will take you through another type of simulation, which is like modeling different CO2 supply scenarios for an algal biorefinery. Now, an algal biorefinery would produce algae, which could be later on be used for production of biofuels or biogas, as Professor Sanjeev might have taken you through the journey of algal biofuels. In this particular study, we were saying like how can we get CO2 for that algal biorefineries. Now, algae, like any other plant, would take in CO2, have the photosynthesis process, and produce biofuels. So, first question is, why make fuels from algae? The answer is simple, because it acts two ways. It takes CO2 from the atmosphere and brings out fuels which have low carbon in terms of it has a low cost and it could have multiple uses. It uses all the nutrients and has lowest eutrophication potential. This term is something that you would understand in the LCA section. It's biodegradable. We can use underutilized land, like sorry, you could utilize or you can make up algal biorefineries in places like deserts. And algae has almost 10 times efficiency than a normal plant when it comes to conversion of sunlight into biomass. So these kinds of algae are really rich in fats or lipids, which could be used for production of fuels. And the final advantage of algae is that you can grow that in salty and brackish water, which means it can also act as a source of purifying different types of wastewater. So this is why people normally go for LG, and we have different compelling reasons for it. Now, major challenge for the LG would be the supply of CO2. Now you might ask, like, why? Like, they can take in CO2 from the atmosphere. Of course they can, but their productivity will be very low. If I increase CO2, their productivity goes very high. Like, it could be an order of magnitude higher. Just take the example of greenhouses. You might have seen a greenhouse which is made up of glasses and green covers. Why do you do that? Because the productivity is very high. When the level of CO2 increases inside the greenhouse gases, the productivity of plants is very high, and this is why greenhouses are set up. The same case applies to LG. The more the CO2 you are able to supply, the more could be conversion and the production of LG, and the more could be the products in terms of different types of fuels or industrial chemicals. Now, the study was aimed at how can we supply this CO2. Now, this CO2 can be sourced from different power plants that we already have. Suppose take the case of India. We have many coal-based power plants which are emitting CO2, a lot of CO2. Why don't we route that CO2 for the production of LG? So in this way, one thing is that we are utilizing that CO2 that is coming from the power plant. We are negating that. And then we are using that for production of more valuable products. So these kinds of systems are called BECCS, which is Biomass Integrated Carbon Capture. We are growing biomass and we are also doing carbon capture. And it's found to be much more cost effective as compared to pumping CO2 into the ground and then storing it for maybe a couple of years. So this is why the study came into being. I believe I would able to explain you the premise for this study. And what we are trying to see is what would be the emissions that would be associated with this capture and supply of CO2. Now you have the CO2 that is coming out of the power plants, but you need to capture that CO2 and you need to supply that to the Elygal biorefinery. Now this capture and supply, would that have any emission associated with it? And it would, because it would consume electricity, it would consume piping, and we are trying to quantify that. So this is what the pictorial representation looks like. We have the power plants which would produce CO2 or emissions. They would also produce electricity which would go into the grid. We have the photobioreactors which would produce LG. It would produce LG. And it would consume sunlight, which is well free of cost. It will give us oxygen, which is good for the environment. And the products could be fuels in terms of biodiesel or biojet fuels, and products like nutraceuticals, which have huge economic values, feed for the livestock, fertilizers, and others. Now we need to quantify this. Does this capture and supply has a feedstock or has a cost associated with it? And for this, we used this same software, this Aspen Plus. Again, like this is the software for which we are going to have a small hands-on session. And now there's an important nitty-gritty attached to it, which is the LG would need CO2 only during the day. At night, it won't need any CO2. The reason being, at night there's no light. Without light, there could be no photosynthesis process, and it won't require any CO2. So we need to supply CO2 only during the day and not during the night. So we need to consider of this thing. Whereas the supply from a power plant would be 24 hours a day. And we did using Aspen Plus, and we had 4 different supply scenarios, which is, what if the CO2 was coming from a coal-based power plant, a natural gas power plant, which is still cleaner than coal-based power plant, but both are fossil fuels. Then what if I build a standalone NGCC plant, which means I build a plant specifically for providing CO2 to the Elygal biorefinery, and whatever electricity is produced, I give that to the grid. And finally, what if I combust biomass? I grow biomass, I combust that. The heat that is produced is used to raise steam. That steam can be used to produce electricity. And the burning would create CO2, and that CO2 can then be used for growth of LG. The processes that we tried to model, and this is what the model looked like. You have the coal-based power plant. The coal would go in, the electricity goes out to the grid, but we have the CO2 coming in. We need to scrub it, we need to compress it and transport over 2 miles. So 2 miles was a distance that we thought would be a good distance for the distance between the Elygal biorefinery and the power plant. Then at the plant, we would also again need to scrub it again for the CO2 to be used in the biorefinery. The other way could be natural gas power plant. Now, natural gas power plant, although they're cleaner, but the syngas that we have got has very low concentration of CO2. So we need to capture CO2. And this capturing can be done with the help of different solvents. One of the basic one is methyl ethyl alcohol, MEA. and which can be done. So here I have a standard absorber and stripper, which means I absorb the CO2 in a mixture of chemicals and then remove the CO2. I compress it, I transport it, and then scrub it before the biorefinery. Then there could be another option wherein we have a CHP plant, which means I am making the plant specifically for the algae production. Herein, I can put in one more thing. Since the algae would require CO2 only during the daytime, nighttime I can store the CO2. And you can use this CO2 during the daytime. In all these plants, I'm just taking the CO2 during the daytime, and the nighttime I'm just flaring that to the atmosphere. But in this case, I can store it during the daytime in the storage section and use the whole thing in the, I can store it during the nighttime, and the whole thing I can use during the daytime. And I can again scrub it and use in the biorefinery. The final thing is, why not use biomass, combust it, produce electricity, whatever is possible, scrub the gas, transport it like over the distance, compress it, and then use in the biorefinery. So these are the things which again can be done in a software like Aspen Plus. It's not just related to a biorefinery, but a biorefinery itself would have many other inputs. And if you're talking about the algal biorefinery, the major input would be CO2. How do you model that? The software comes to your rescue. So again, it's not a software that is specifically made for biomass processes. It's a software that is used for any process simulation. And it's the best in the class with a lot of databases. Again, we are going to discuss that. So you can design your own systems and come up with your novel systems, which can integrate biomass, different chemical industries, and different fuel production industries, and see how the mass flow and energy flow looks like. And if you are getting good mass flow and energy flows, you can go to further making an economic analysis as well as a life cycle assessment. So this was the results look like. If I'm quantifying the grams of CO2 equivalent that are emitted per grams of CO2 delivered for different footprints, I can see that the biomass combustion is giving me the lowest emissions. The reason is straightforward, because this biomass would grow above. Like the biomass takes CO2 from the atmosphere to grow itself, and this CO2 that is then emitted from the combustion of biomass is then utilized again for the production of some other biofuels. So I am making the use of carbon dioxide twice. So that's why the emission goes to be negative. It's acting as a sort of carbon sequestrator. Then if I emit from a coal-based power plant, it's somewhat higher, but these are the emissions I would lead. For natural gas production power plant, it's still higher because I'm going for this carbon capture unit, which would require its own energy, and this energy is coming from the combustion of natural gas. This natural gas would have its own sources and it would have its own emissions. And the least effective would be a standalone NGCC unit, because we have a lot of cost associated with this refrigeration as well. So the point here to make is, if I'm going for a case like this, where I'm making a power plant to supply CO2 and electricity, I'm losing almost 50% of the advantage, which means 0.5 grams of CO2 is anyway going to lost to the environment because of the process configuration. So this is another way where a software like Aspen Plus comes to our rescue to understand the different types of integrities or associated with the modeling of big biorefineries. And again, we can have the breakdown of the different components. I think it would be worthwhile to discuss this example again in the LCA class, but just to give you an example. And this is what the flow sheet in Aspen Plus looks like. We have the coal-based power plant. We have the scrubbing twice, and this is what the process looks like. We have the PBRs, algae growth, we have centrifuge, we have a pump, we have a hydrothermal liquefaction plant, which would produce biocrude. Then we have the hydrotreating and hydrocracking, which is similar to our traditional refinery, which would produce refined crude. And then we have a process called catalytic hydrothermal gasification. So this process, hydrothermal liquefaction, would give us two things, which is biocrude and an aqueous phase. This aqueous phase can then again be gasified to produce syngas, which is similar to the gasification process we discussed earlier. And this gas can then be burnt to produce more heat, and this heat could be used in the process, whereas the gases that you produce could be recycled back for the production of algae. So again, like these kinds of simulation platforms can be used to simulate these complex procedures, like I'm getting CO2 both from the coal-based power plant a localized NGCC unit, and also from the recycle of the gases from a local gasifier. So these kind of simulation would be very difficult to carry out in another simulation platform like MATLAB or some other coding, but it becomes very easy in a platform like this. And we can also estimate like what are the emissions associated with the different aspects of the plant. The CO2 delivery is a major aspect, so that's why we focus on it. And then we have electricity export, we have the losses from the photobioreactors, the nighttime losses, the upgradation of fuel, the combustion of fuels, and the nutrients. So we can all quantify this based upon the material flow data or the material balance that we get from the Aspen Plus software. So the conclusion is that we would get the lowest CO2 supply from the biomass sources. It's acting like a carbon sequestrator. It's much more economic than the other technologies which are proposed for sequestrating CO2. A standalone NGCC unit would not be so good because it has a lot of energy inputs. And these results can be used as a benchmark for different CO2 supply scenarios. So this was another type of simulation that we can do in the software that we are going to discuss in the next hands-on session. So with that, I am again open to any questions that you might have. So it could be related to any of the presentations, either the first one or the second one. With that, I would also like to ask, was any one of you able to get the Aspen Plus software? Maybe you can write in the chat box if you're able to procure from your university. Because the initial idea was that you guys would come and IIT Roorkee and we have the Aspen Plus simulation licenses here. But since it's an online platform now, it would be difficult to provide a license to everyone. But again, like, was any one of you able to get the license at your end? Okay, no issues if no one was able to get. Like, we'll proceed in such a way that you get an understanding of the software, and if someone of you wants to do such kind of modeling in the future, they can look for a license either through universities or partner universities and then go through it. So with that, like, I'm open to questions. If there are no questions, feel free to leave and we can end the session. Thanks for being such a nice audience. Then maybe we'll end our session here and we'll begin the next session at 2:30 p.m. So with that, let us wrap up this session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Arora, for the interesting discussion and presentation. So we'll meet at 2:30 for the next session.